Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here and for listening. And welcome to the First Gen Pre PA podcast and YouTube channel. Representation matters. And while it is very desirable to strive to be a flawless pre PA undergraduate student and applicant to physician assistant school, it's extremely difficult, especially for those students who are first generation, a term that is used to describe a person who is the first in their family to break barriers such as finishing high school or attending college or applying to PA school. Here on our platform, we encourage vulnerable conversation from pre PA students, PA students, and certified PAs on their personal, non traditional, first generation journeys into the physician assistant profession. By acknowledging the disparities and setbacks that being first generation has on collegiate students, this organization has proven that what once seemed impossible is now becoming a reality for first generation students everywhere. Thank you for listening. Now let's continue with this week's first episode on what your personal chances are of getting into PA school. With the PA platform, also known as Certified PA, Savanna Perry. Woo!
Hey, thank you for having me. Very excited to be the first guest.
Of course. Thank you so much for being here today. Okay, let's go to the next. So today I am honored and floored to have one of the giants of the medical social media world who has helped me along with my pre-PA journey. We have certified PA dermatologist Savanna Perry, founder of the PA platform PA mentorship website. PA Perry has been through the physician assistant application process and realized there was a lack of resources out there for her own journey. So, after overcoming her own obstacles within the field, she created her Instagram platform, which totals to 43,000 followers, her TikTok, which is reaching over 1.9 million likes, and her YouTube and Spotify podcast with over 300 episodes. PA Perry is the PA mentorship resource. Through her platforms, PA Perry has selflessly devoted her experience, education, and time to mentor pre-PA students within her comment sections, weekly Q&A sessions on Instagram, and information on the PA school mock interviews, personal statement workshops, CASPA walkthroughs, mentorship sessions, and more. Is there anything that I missed?
I don't think so. You got it. Yeah.
Awesome. But really though, thank you so much for giving me your time today, PA Perry, and for all of your help that you've given me through my own pre-PA journey these last years. It truly means the world to have a mentor like you helping all of us.
Yeah, I wish there was more info out there. So still working on that for our profession.
Right. So just because this is a first gen student org, I wanted to ask a few questions about your own first gen identity as well.
Sure.
Seeing your success of finally becoming a certified PA dermatologist, it really is fuel for all of us first gen pre PAs to continue pushing through the barriers. So, my first question is, what is your background as a first generation PA?
So my background, I'm not a first generation college student. My mom went to college. My dad did not. He went to a trade school. He was a welder by trade and ended up actually teaching welding at the local community college for 30 years. And then my mom was an elementary school teacher. So she went to college, but when it comes to medicine, I was the first person in kind of my immediate family to go into medicine. I have one cousin who's a good bit older than me who did go to medical school, but we don't really live near each other. So he was somewhat helpful if I had questions about getting into the medical field in general, but not as much about anything having to do with the PA profession. It was my dad who introduced me to the PA profession, and I think my parents have always done a really great job of encouraging both me and my sister, who she went the business route, also not medical, but encouraging us to do whatever we're passionate about and interested in. I don't think they necessarily put a ton of pressure on me to go into medicine, but I do think they recognized that it was something I would be good at. And so maybe gently kind of tried to lead me there, or at least give me opportunities to pursue that. And so they, yeah, they kind of, my dad told me about the PA profession, and even it's funny that he's the one who told me about it, but he's also the person who still would be the one like, are you going to go to med school? Are you going to get your doctorate? Asking me those follow-up questions, when he's the reason I'm a PA, because he told me about it. And it is something I think that they were very proud of. And I also feel like I had a really great example of strong work ethic, because my parents were working and kind of showing me that you can both have a family and be a great parent while having a profession and a career that is your own. And so I think they did a really great job of that. I do think that led to maybe a little bit more work on my part of trying to figure stuff out, because they really couldn't necessarily answer all of my questions about working in medicine or even things in college. Another difference was my mom stayed at home while she went to college. She just went to somewhere local that she, lived at home, drove to college, and then drove home. Whereas I moved away for college, and that was also something new for them because they hadn't done that. And so I went away. It was an hour and a half away. It wasn't super far, but I was at a big university and on my own, and it was a little different for all of us to be in that situation also.
Right. Awesome. Okay, my other question was, do you feel that being first gen going into medicine in your family had set you back on the playing field compared to other peers who had family members in medicine when you were an undergrad student?
Not necessarily. I feel like most people who are interested in medicine or PA specifically are kind of go-getters and pretty self-motivated. So I mean, I did have to do a lot of research and figure some stuff out, figure out classes and majors and experience and how to do all of that. I didn't have, anyone telling me that, but even so my husband, he ended up, we were dating in college, and he ended up going to med school, and his dad is a dentist. And so originally he, was deciding between dental or med school. But even with his dad having like that background, because it had been so long ago, he wasn't necessarily that helpful in making that decision. He's like, yeah, I can tell you what I do, but I don't remember what I did to get into school. It was so different. We didn't have all this stuff. And so things change a lot. So even if you have that connection, I think it would honestly be more than a parent being helpful. I think having like a sibling or somebody who's gone through it recently is very
Right.
helpful. Even more so than probably a parent. But I think just knowing that you're going into this field, and you've got to have your ducks in a row, and you've got to figure stuff out. I think the people who struggle with PA are the ones who, because it is a newer profession, they just don't know about it. And so that, I think, is the hardest thing, is they may not find out about the PA profession until junior or senior year. And PAEA has some great studies about this. And that's actually the largest group of people who apply to PA school, is people who found out about it in their junior and senior year. So at that point, they feel really behind. Whereas I made this decision, I was kind of pre-PA freshman year, but I really decided that summer before going into sophomore year. And so when you decide a little bit later, you feel like you're playing catch up and you have a lot more to do. And I think that raises the stakes a good bit. So I think if more people just knew about the PA profession and could have that plan going into college, it would make it so much easier, which for somebody who's a first gen or like me doesn't have anyone in medicine, they may not know about PA until they are in school and hear about it at a club meeting or from a classmate who's doing the same thing.
Yeah, that was perfect. I have one last question.
Yeah.
What do you think are your biggest barriers or just big barriers in general for first generation students to experience when pursuing a career in the PA profession?
I think that just the knowledge of the profession and probably the connections to people in medicine. That is another benefit of having family in the profession or who have gone through it, is they can find people to shadow a little bit easier and have those kind of foot in the door type situations. Whereas if you don't have that, you're going to be like me with your phone book, calling every office and begging them to let you come in and get some hours and get that experience. So I think that those connections are really helpful. But even if, as a first gen student, if you don't have those connections and feel that is a barrier, I think you, if you kind of are more vocal about your goals and willing to step out of the box and kind of think about things and talk to people, you may get more connections than you thought. So one of the people that I ended up shadowing was actually my dad. Had said, he taught welding at a college, not medical. And he told his, boss, superior, whoever, I don't know what their titles would be, whoever was in charge of the department, what my plans were when I was in college. And that person said, oh, which he, met me a couple times growing up or whatever. But he said, I know someone who works at the local rehab hospital who is kind of, on the business side, but maybe he would know somebody. He's, one of my good friends. So my dad's boss talked to him and he said, there are PAs that work here. Let me talk to them and see if she could shadow. And so I was able to start shadowing there. And then that same person actually got me a job there as a CNA. And so that's such a random path to get there. But I hear so many similar stories of like, I was checking out at the store and told the person I wanted to be a PA, and they told me their cousin was a PA and gave me her card, and I contacted her. You have to be willing to ask. And the answer might be no, but that's not going to be the end of the world. Like, you have to ask if you want opportunities. And I think that is a huge roadblock for everyone on this path. I get a lot of messages that are, I work with this PA or I see this PA in the hospital every day, but I don't know how to approach them. I don't know what to do. And you just have to take a chance and ask, like, what's the worst that can happen? So I think just making those connections can be a huge barrier, and feeling kind of not sure of where to go for resources. And then I think the other thing that, in talking about resources, I think most people don't realize all the resources that most schools have when it comes to advisors and writing centers and test prep and online databases, all this stuff that can really, really help you, but you have to find it or know who to ask to get it. Like, sometimes it isn't very clear what all is available. So that's, if you've never really kind of been in that college setting or don't have anyone who's been in that setting, that might be something you're just not aware of. So I think those are things that could be barriers, but with, it takes a lot of time and research and, searching to really figure out a lot of these things in the process of becoming a PA.
Right. Awesome. That was perfect. Thank you so much.
You're
Okay,
welcome.
we can move on to the next. So let's get into the main segment, which is called What Are Your Chances? Could you explain what you did on your website with this, PA Perry?
Yeah, so we did a webinar. It was actually suggested by people in the audience. We do a couple webinars each month, and somebody said, could you do one that's, what are your chances looking at stats? Which is a little tough. I always give a disclaimer that this process is so much more gray than black and white that it is very difficult to tell someone what their chances are. You could even come to me with like a 4.0 and tons of experience, and I would never say like, oh yeah, you're guaranteed to get into PA school. I still wouldn't say that. So we're looking at stats, but we're also looking at kind of where you're applying, and there's just a lot that goes into it. So in the webinar, we talked through a lot of that and kind of looked at some different applicants to talk about what their chances of getting into PA school would be.
Okay, perfect. I can hand off this first applicant to you then.
Okay, yeah. So for this applicant, we look at GPA first. GPA is, according to, again, PAEA, the best predictor of how someone will perform in PA school, but also one of the main kind of minimum requirements for a lot of programs. So with any applicant, you have to be able to meet the minimums of what a program requires to be considered for that school. So when we're looking at this applicant, this is their first time applying, and overall with a 3.66, that's about average for getting accepted into PA school. And then overall science is at a 3.27. So it's a little bit lower than average. Average for science is usually around a 3.5. It looks like this person had 3 C pluses and retook 1 to get an A-. I would want to know more about whether those courses were in prereqs or if they were just in random classes. That would make a big difference as to whether they may need to retake those or how they would play into their application. Looking at the experience, so where's the number of hours? 3,000 plus hours in rehab, brain and spine, hospital safety care associate, like a medical assistant who cannot take vitals, but does feedings, transports, hygiene, assisted walking, PTOT aid. And then, so this is their only experience, which when it comes to experience, it really just depends on where you're applying, because some schools will put more emphasis on the number of hours, some put more emphasis on the type of experience and the quality of it. So as long as you're kind of checking the box, it's probably fine, but also something to kind of check on program websites to see what their preference is. Some healthcare experience. Intern at Public Health Asian Free Clinic as main Vietnamese translator, so that's great. And 1 month public health medical trip to rural India, also a cool experience. Shadowed 4 doctors, 8 PAs, 1 NP. That's a good bit of shadowing, and it looks like the PA shadowing is in a few different areas. It says derm, surgery, and plastics. I also will typically encourage that there's some primary care shadowing, just because that is usually the main focus of the PA profession. So we want to make sure we show that we understand that kind of side of things also. So there's some research experience with publications. It looks like not clinical research necessarily, but that could be included. Research isn't as big of a deal for PA school, but it's more just kind of like a bonus points kind of thing. Volunteering, let's see, university first generation pre-PA social media mentorship platform founder. You might would have to explain that in your details for your application people to really understand it. So it's covering up crisis, mental health text hotline, and that's been a great COVID volunteer experience. University diversity and inclusion scholarship program, great to include. That wouldn't, if it's a program, it would be volunteering. If it's just a scholarship you got, it would be under scholarships, and then not a huge deal. And then a mindfulness meditation retreat. So if it was a retreat that you were volunteering with, that would be included. If it was just something you went on, it would not. Letters of recommendation. It looks like 1 PA, 1 doctor, 1 college professor who saw the C to A growth. That's good. 1 academic advisor and 1 research faculty advisor. That's a good variety, depending on where you're applying. If they have a big emphasis on volunteering, you may want like a volunteer supervisor, and then hopefully the PA or doctor are people who have worked with you in a clinical setting and can speak to that. GRE 305, so that's pretty solid. Usually we look for over 300, but we'd also want each section to be greater than the 50th percentile. Okay.
I can move on to the next.
Okay. Okay, so
Yeah.
look, yeah, here it is at their programs. So, when we're looking at all of these, we want to make sure they meet the requirements. And then what's also included here is the averages of the school. And that's even more important to look at, because a school can say, so just for example, looking at Duke here in the middle, they technically don't have a minimum GPA. But if you look at their average GPA, and they'll put kind of who was accepted from the previous cycle, they had 3.53 to 3.82, and science was 3.42 to 3.80. And their PCE hours from last cycle were 2,900 to 7,000. So that tells you that type of applicant that those programs are looking for. That doesn't mean that they wouldn't accept someone outside of these numbers, but it means that you're probably going to have to be pretty extraordinary in some other area to make up for if you're not fitting into one of these categories. So let's say your GPA was lower, you're probably going to have a lot more experience, or vice versa, or just really fit that program well. So that one might be a little bit of a reach. Honestly, I think Duke's kind of a reach for everyone just because they get so many applications. But then if we're looking at USC or Cornell, I think both of these are a good fit. I think the averages are pretty on track here. I'd want to make sure the prereqs were both the correct classes and the correct grades to meet the requirements there also. And then looking at USC, yeah, I think that one's a good fit there. They have a little bit higher average PCE, but when we're talking about averages, you also have to think about how one person or a couple people can skew those a ton. Like in my class, we had two different people who were in their 40s and had been working as paramedics for years. And so they came in with a ridiculous amount of hours, which made our class average go up, even though most of us didn't have anywhere near that. So take an average with a grain of salt. I think the ranges that Duke does are actually a lot more helpful, but most programs don't do that. But yeah, I think all of those are pretty good fits. Usually the average number of programs that someone applies to who is accepted is 6. So that's a kind of a good number to be around. And they've done studies that show anything over 10 applications really does not increase your chances of getting accepted to PA school. There's a little increase from 10 to 12, but anything over 12 doesn't increase it. So that's kind of just when people are looking at how many programs to apply to, something to kind of keep in mind.
We can go to applicant number 2 now.
Okay. So also a first-time applicant. All right, so when we look at the GPA, it's pretty impressive, a 3.81 overall, 3.75 science. Over 1,000 hours as a PCA. I'm assuming they're still maybe getting hours, so that's something they could update throughout the cycle. Some pharmacy tech hours, some shadowing, some volunteering, a publication in 100 hours. I need to know a little bit more about kind of research. Leadership, which is good. Worked as a TA and a peer mentor, part of the exec board. Okay. Letters of recommendation, planning on 1 from a PA, 1 from employment, and 1 from a professor. So that's good. You can have up to 5. So there's room there to maybe have a volunteer supervisor, or some schools will require a physician letter. So they need to look and make sure that that's not something they need. And then planning on taking the GRE, which is good. Taking the GRE just gives you more schools you can apply to, since some of them do require that.
Okay.
Okay, here's the school. So here are their two top choices. So both of these, they will need the GRE. Let's see. Looks like PCE meets the requirements. So it's interesting. Both of these schools' average GPAs are a little bit higher. They both are around a 3.7 for average GPA and average science GPA for both the Marietta and the Baldwin Wallace schools. And so this person, I do think they would be a good applicant for this program. The average amount of hours is a little bit higher, so that's something that they need to just continue working on. Again, we'd also need to know prereqs and grades to make sure everything was good there. They need to do well on the GRE, but this looks good. What you'll find is if you're looking to apply in a certain geographic area, so this says Ohio-based schools, if there aren't as many programs there, they're going to be more competitive and have either more requirements or higher averages just because they're desirable because of the location, and they'll get more applicants who are wanting to kind of stay there.
Okay, awesome. This is our last applicant.
Okay. All right, so we have another first-time applicant. Overall 3.51, science 3.2. A little more hours, so 3,200 hours as a medical assistant PCA, hospital volunteering for healthcare experience, around 700 hours, also front desk at free clinic and tutoring. So that's all really good experience. 100 hours with a PA, shadowing, letter of recommendation from a doctor, a PA, and a professor. That's good. May want, a work supervisor or a volunteer supervisor also. The GRE looks good at 305. Okay, and then we have some leadership and volunteering. It looks like a lot of kind of different organizations here, which is really good. You want to, show consistency is more important than doing something one time. So it's better to do something once a month for an hour than only have these random one-time events if you can. So we want to really show commitment to what you're doing and that it's something you're passionate about and not just doing to check a box for volunteering. So yeah, this looks like a pretty solid, pretty average applicant. We'll look at kind of where they're applying here. Looks like, okay, Rutgers and South College. Let's see. Looking at this, so looks like they hit the minimums. Let me look back at that science GPA. So another thing with the science GPA, they're listing it at 3.2 because because Rutgers requires a minimum of 3.2. We'd want to make sure that that is their CASPA calculated science GPA and that it's correct, because sometimes people will get a little bit of a surprise, usually in the negative direction, when they apply and CASPA calculates their GPAs out, because they do include repeated courses and sometimes undergrad transcripts will take those out and not include them. So if you're kind of on the line, you want to just, make sure and prepare so that you can make sure you're meeting the minimums. CASPA won't recalculate your GPA more than one time per cycle. So or more than that initial time. And so we want to make sure we're not getting kicked out of schools because of those numbers. But their average for science is a 3.36. So that tells me that they really do look at applicants holistically. They're looking at everything to choose the people in their class. For South College here, so one thing that's interesting about South College that I just know personally, because one of my best friends went to this program, and other schools will do this as well, and it's extremely frustrating, is they do have a minimum requirement for their GRE. It's a minimum of 300, although that is not posted anywhere. And so that's kind of, I guess an internal requirement that they don't, I'm not sure how that works, but yeah, so they typically will not interview unless you have a 300, or if they do, usually you'll be waitlisted until you retake the GRE. So that was actually what happened with my friend. And she was also the first person in her family to go into medicine, but she ended up getting waitlisted by that program. They told her to retake the GRE, and then she retook it and was accepted to their program. So those are things that you kind of have to be careful with too, or, try to, if you can go to info sessions and talk to programs, if they say that something is recommended, they probably mean that it's required. And so you kind of have to, it's a little bit, I guess, of a game that they play, or, they have, I understand, because they have to weed people out somehow. But that can be a little bit frustrating.
We're done with the 3 applicants, but if you're still watching this and no one of the 3 applicants looked exactly like what your application looks like, pick and choose from what PA Perry advised from each aspect of each of the 3 applications and form a plan to improve your own application. I also created this segment just in case if the pre-PA student watching doesn't have stats that look similar to the 3 applicants. These questions and answers can help guide your own review of your own applications or just common application fears that no one really tends to talk about publicly. So we can go through these 6 questions now. The
Okay.
first one, yeah. The first one is, what are other paths to getting below a C grade, many C grades, or below a 3.0 GPA?
Like other paths to PA, or?
Um, just because I know it's a common misconception that many pre-PA students have, like once you get your first C grade or below, like your journey for this path is over. Like
Oh, no.
don't even think about going to PA school anymore. Like there are no chances.
Oh gosh, no. Um, definitely not. So you do have to meet the minimums, just, you'll get weeded out if you don't. But I've seen so many applications that get interviews and acceptances that have tons of C's, D's, F's. I mean, all kinds of stuff. When I'm calculating GPAs or kind of doing application reviews or some of these things, I mean, even I'm surprised sometimes by how their GPA comes out with some kind of blips on it. So having these grades is not the end of the world. I got a C plus in OChem too. And, I think I brought it up in interviews. I don't think anyone else ever did. But it's kind of, you want to do your best and do whatever it takes to do your best. Part of that is being able to recognize when you're struggling. And that's something I've seen, I don't think I was good at in undergrad. And I've seen with working with people, I think, you're in it, you feel like you should be able to do everything. You should be able to take these classes and work and get your volunteering and stuff. And it's okay if you can't. So if you need to take a step back and your path takes a year or 2 years longer than you were expecting, that's okay. So, if you did get a C in a prereq, you probably do need to retake that. If your GPA is lower, you do need to keep taking classes. Sometimes that looks like doing a post-bac or a master's program. I think sometimes it's easier to focus on doing more of what is easier. So like just getting more experience versus recognizing that you do need to go back and take some classes. So you've got to look at things pretty objectively and honestly to figure out what you need to be focusing on.
I remember you also posted about one of your mentees who was a non-traditional applicant and they had an overall GPA of 2.79 and a 2.68, and they were still accepted to PA school. Could you talk about just some of your non-traditional applicants with low GPAs and their success stories?
Yeah. And so part of that is also being flexible in where you go and where you apply. So that applicant in particular applied to a brand new program that just got provisional accreditation and was on a very short timeline to fill their program, which typically in those cases, they are looking at every single applicant that comes in, not just maybe the ones that meet the minimums. And so they were able to, I mean, even though it meant, moving and changing things and uprooting, that was a way they were willing to be flexible to reach their goal of becoming a PA. And so you still have to meet the minimums, and that's always been my thing, is if you do meet the minimums, go ahead and apply, but keep working on your application. So, there are success stories out there, but if you have those lower GPAs and you apply to Duke, who doesn't have a minimum, that's not necessarily realistic. If you look at their averages, they're still looking for a actually really high GPA. So I think, you've got to weigh kind of your willingness to be flexible in the process with how much you want to do this and what you're willing to sacrifice. And whether that means moving or being kind of last minute ready to go for a wait list spot, that kind of thing. There are definitely, it's just about finding a good fit. So finding a program that fits you with what you have now and then continuing to make it better too.
Next question. I personally have fallen victim to this, but how do you not compare yourself to Reddit thread stats? Are they truly realistic and I'm just behind?
So you just don't look at them. No, I really don't recommend looking at stat threads. I mean, it's okay to kind of check in every once in a while, but it's such a small snapshot of people who are applying. And I mean, it's just, they are real. I mean, well, we don't know. They could be lying. Like, they are posting what's realistic for them, but you're not seeing, the 1,000 other applicants who also applied or were accepted. So yeah, I wouldn't give too much time or thought to the stats. I've just learned that on the internet, you can find anything you want. You can find the story that matches yours, or that's the complete opposite. Whatever you're looking for, you're probably going to find it on Reddit or a Facebook group to either support you or discourage you. So it's best to just, not go that route.
Right. Okay, what if most of my PA shadowing hours were all online?
That they're fine to include on your application, but I do think schools are looking for in-person hours also most of the time. It's just not the same. Online shadowing is not like in-person shadowing. And that's something that when it comes to shadowing, because it is difficult to find opportunities, it's kind of something you should constantly be trying to look for and do. And that's what I encourage people, make it something that you have one day a month where you take a couple hours and you seek out opportunities, whether that's cold calling offices, going to offices, using contacts you have, make that, don't just sit there and say, I can't find any shadowing. If you're not really trying to find shadowing and you're waiting for it to fall in your lap, go out and find shadowing. There are shadowing opportunities out there. You just have to be persistent to find them.
Awesome. Okay, last slide. What are some key aspects or steps that I should review on my application as a reapplicant?
Okay. As a reapplicant, I think the first thing is reaching out to programs that you applied to, whether you were accepted, got an interview, got a wait list, got rejected, and just see if they have feedback. Sometimes they won't respond. Sometimes they'll give you like a very generalized response they send to everybody, but sometimes you'll get some very important information and they will tell you exactly why your application wasn't accepted. And so that gives you some direct steps to take. So first thing, reach out to the programs and then look at where you applied, recheck the requirements, make sure there wasn't anything that you're missing. Some of the areas I see people get kind of messed up would be AP classes and submitting those for prereqs when they aren't accepted, or the prereqs changed or classes expired. So you just want to make sure, everything, all your ducks are in a row when it comes to meeting the requirements for the program. And then I look at your experience details, your essay, your personal statement, and your supplementals, and just make sure those are really, really good. They can kind of make or break an application. And those are really the only parts of it that you get to show anything about yourself outside of your experience. So you need to take advantage of them and then figure out what the biggest weakness is on your application and then keep working on that. So whether it's grades, experience, volunteering, shadowing, find that area and work on making it as good as you can.
Next one is, do I need to have research experience? How can it help my application?
So I mentioned at the beginning, research is kind of like bonus points. Most schools are not putting a huge emphasis on research. For med school, yes, research is extremely important. They like for you to have some type of research and even like lab research. Whereas for PA school, if you are going to do research, having clinical research tends to be preferred where you're working with patients in some capacity. So do you need it? I wouldn't say you need it. If you have it, will it help? Yes. Would I choose a research experience over a patient care experience, over shadowing, over volunteering? No. That would be probably, lower on the totem pole of things that I would want to pursue.
And last question, how do I go about getting a strong letter of recommendation from a PA or MD if I don't work with one?
That's about really just establishing a relationship. So even if it's not a shadowing relationship, shadowing's great. Even if it's more of like a mentor relationship where you're getting advice from that person, to where they could write you a letter, that's okay. Sometimes that might mean that if you don't work with one, you look for work opportunities where you do. And that's something that you actively pursue so that you can get that strong letter. But yeah, you really have to, this is where knowing what you're going to need ahead of time is important, because the same thing goes for professor letters. I don't know how big your classes are, but mine were all 300 plus people. And so my professors did not know me. So when it was
Right.
time to get a professor letter, I just had to go to someone random, and I know it wasn't a strong letter. And so I think, had I planned accordingly, I would have chosen and planned to take a smaller class with someone that I knew and had heard would write great letters solely to get that letter. And so, I think you have to kind of plan ahead. So if you're knowing that you're going to need a PA letter, you don't wait till your application season to be like, oh yeah, right now I need to get a letter. You start thinking ahead of time to make that relationship so that you have someone to ask and even a backup. So not even just one person, you want to have that person and a backup, ideally, if you can.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was it. I just wanted to say thank you so much for your time again, PA Perry. I could not have asked for a better launch and first episode with you. You have been the pre PA mentor of my dreams, and I'm really just so grateful and honored to have you here with me. So thank you so much.
Well, I'm excited to see where your podcast goes. And yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Okay, if you enjoyed this first episode from our student org, please check us out on Instagram, on our Spotify podcast, and on our YouTube channel to rewatch or listen to any of these. Thank you so much for being here and for listening. Bye bye.